Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary Podcast, where we discuss the ideas, tools, and narratives that surround what Jesus called the kingdom of God and how they shape our imagination today. In this series, we're looking at what the Bible calls the gospel of the kingdom and what it means for the kingdom of God to have arrived. Welcome back to Kingdom Commentary. I'm Matt Holliday, and I'm here with Josh Brinley. How are you,
me.
Josh?
I'm good. Not coughing anymore.
Nice.
Not sick.
How was your last week? The episode came out on Thanksgiving, and we didn't realize because we recorded it ahead of time.
Yes.
How's your Thanksgiving?
It was great.
It was great.
Yeah. Just spent time with family at my mom's house. It was fun. Food was good. Turkey was not dry.
Nice.
Thank God.
What are you thankful for?
Honestly, this year I'm thankful I've been able to grow in a lot of different ways. I feel like I've gotten a lot closer to my friends like you and others, and very thankful that I got a new job earlier this year and have a different living situation that's really been a blessing. And so lots of things, but
Nice.
yeah, it's been a good year so
Yeah.
far. Yeah.
We just went down to San Diego.
Yeah,
Together.
yes, that was awesome.
That was
Like, we did everything that I wanted
I'm
to.
thankful for that.
That was
That
pretty
was pretty
great.
good. Tacos, poke.
Yeah, it was really good. And we just got to see all the beaches and things like that, like UCSD campus, which is really cool. And
Oh, we get to watch one battle after another.
oh
Finally saw.
my gosh, so good.
I told you.
Definitely, that's on my favorite movies list.
Everyone I know said when they finally saw it, said that's not what I thought it was going to be from the trailer.
No, the trailer doesn't really, which I can't decide whether or not that's a good thing, because I think in one way trailers tend to over explain what the movie
yeah.
is. But this one definitely, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So
The tone was pretty different.
yeah, the tone was definitely different. It seemed way goofier in the trailer, where it was actually a bit more serious than I thought it would be. It was still goofy.
They were funny. Yeah,
but
so.
Very Tarantino-y, which we both enjoy.
Yeah.
No, it was so good. You were hyping it up when we were about to see it.
I was worried that I remembered it too highly.
Yeah. No, it was exactly like I was very pleasantly surprised, and I didn't realize how long it was. It's almost a 3-hour movie. 2 hours and 50 minutes is the runtime.
Really?
That's crazy. But it didn't feel like that because I was enjoying it the whole time.
Yeah. We should talk about it sometime, more in depth.
Yeah, I'd be down. Yeah, that great movie. I'd encourage everyone to watch that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Not officially. Not officially.
Yeah.
I guess. As a movie lover, I would encourage people to watch it.
The first 20 minutes of the movie are pretty...
Yeah, it's got some stuff for sure, but whatever.
But it's great. I saw Frankenstein too in theaters.
Yeah, that was good.
That was also 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
The design of it looked really good. Apparently,
it's
cool. Really faithful to the book.
It is. It changes a few big things, but it's probably way more faithful than any other movie about Frankenstein that's come out. And I can't always decide when things come out on Netflix. I didn't watch it in Netflix. I watched it in the theater.
Right.
But I can't always decide if a shot looks beautiful or ugly. I think most of the shots were really beautiful. Every once in a while, there's a shot that I was like, that might be ugly, but that might be on purpose, This might be a very ugly shot on purpose.
Yeah.
But it was overall a beautiful movie. So pretty good.
That always is an interesting dilemma when things are dual released. That's how it was with Dune, right? Dune was released on HBO Max.
That was just because of COVID, though, right?
Yeah, that's true. But they've been doing that less now.
Yeah.
It's almost always exclusively in theaters now, at least for a couple of months before it starts streaming.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense for them to stream it right away because,
lose money.
Yeah, for the studio, for sure. And, it's fun to go see a movie. I don't know. Maybe not everyone agrees.
I love...
It's expensive. Going that part.
Yeah,
but
yeah. I love going to see movies, and I would almost always rather go see a movie.
Yeah.
I think most people don't feel that way. I think most people watch movies on their phone. and most
Oh,
people.
phone.
I know.
Not a phone, man.
I know.
At least watch
Okay,
it on a TV.
I
Don't watch a
agree,
movie on a
but
phone.
people want to do it while they do their laundry, you know.
Yeah, I get it. I could do that with TV shows. I could watch TV shows
Mm-hmm.
mainly because I've already seen them. But if it's a show I haven't seen, I'm not watching that on my phone.
Yeah.
Because I want to actually understand what's happening. Otherwise, you're just kind of like autopilot. Like then you're not really
I think that's the way
understanding what's
most people
happening.
watch movies, you know? That's what the whole
So
Netflix thing.
strange.
Have you seen that like Netflix is purposely writing their scripts in a way that you don't have to pay as much attention. So the
Mm.
characters spell out what's going on in a scene more directly than
Isn't
they
that
have
just
to.
bad writing?
Yes. So that you don't have to watch the whole time. So you can be doing other things and it can be going in the background and you can still know everything that's happening.
This is a whole other conversation that needs to be had about the attention span
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Because I am actively trying to resist that. I can see my attention span like declining. I'm like, absolutely not. That's why I don't use any of those in most of the
Instagram,
apps and
yeah.
things like that. Or it's like social media. It's just like I saw something
'Cause you're better
the
than
other day. Oh. I think it's because your brain is supposed to be bored so that you can do things that are interesting and stimulating,
Oh yeah, be creative.
right?
Out of boredom.
Like when I'm bored, I find something good to do instead of filling my time with stuff that I don't actually care about, because then I just feel hollow at the end of it. I don't know. That's a whole commentary, but yeah, I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
Because I'd want to do more creative things. I want to carve out more time to do creative things. So
Yeah.
like, why waste my time doing other things?
That's fair enough. We're gonna jump back into the theme we've been talking about, the Kingdom of God theme. We actually recorded something already on this, and we're gonna try to do it again just because it felt like we were both sick when we first recorded.
Yeah, I was coughing up a storm,
and
now I'm not coughing.
I don't think either of us were like super clear. So, and by either of us, I mean
Delirious.
me especially. So I think we're just gonna
Sleep
run through this
depraved.
again a little bit. Deprived.
Deprived? Sleep deprived. Yeah, you're right.
Maybe a little.
I don't know what sleep I don't know.
All right.
Anyways,
We're gonna talk about
yes.
Genesis 3 through 11 as what is the problem with the world. And I feel like I want to lay a few foundation contexts that we can like take little detours through, and then go through the story, because what's wrong with the world is like a super complicated question,
Yes.
and Genesis 3 through 11 doesn't give a simple answer, because it realizes, I mean, the Bible, the people who wrote the Bible are very smart, and they realize that there's not just one problem, but there are several. And they tell these different stories to highlight different parts of what's wrong with the world. And I think sometimes with our maybe over systematized Western theology in the Western church, we get overly familiar with like maybe one story, like Genesis 3. And we're like, what's wrong with the world is that we've sinned. And because we've sinned, we are dying or deserve hell or something like that. And that's what's wrong with the world. And Jesus comes to fix it. And then it's like a straight jump to Jesus or something like that. When instead, I would say Genesis 3 through 11 gives a way bigger picture of what's wrong with the world. Way more comprehensive, way more like nuanced and complicated. And that's part of it, but it's not all of it. And I'd like to just trace out a little bit of different themes of what it thinks is wrong with the world. And before I do that too, I want to say this. Genesis 1 through 11 is written differently than Genesis 12 through 50. And scholars like John Walton, who we've talked about before, call Genesis 1 through 11, it's the genre of creation myth.
Right.
And creation myth was a genre that a lot of ancient Near Eastern literature was written in, and it has to do with the origins of the world, but not just where the world came from, but like why the world is the way that it is. And it gives a lot of answers to why the world is the way that it is, and it's told in a way that is similar to all the other creation myths. And I'll kind of balance these two things where it's like, one, that doesn't mean that none of it's true just because it has the word myth in it. Myth doesn't just mean it's all like fiction or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a style. It's a style we don't have anymore, that we don't write in anymore, that was common at the time. And two, though, I would say, when you read a creation myth, the question you're supposed to be asking is like, what does this mean for how we see the world? Not, did this happen exactly the way that we thought that it happened?
Mm.
And maybe that's controversial. Like
For some people, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's not a hill I want to die on either. I just want to say some of these stories get really weird in Genesis 3-11, and they're not afraid of the weirdness because that's part of the literary style. So what I want to do when we look through these is sort of we can come back to it, but put the weirdness to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you read these questions, I mean, when you read these stories, even if you grew up with the Bible, some of them you probably haven't heard very often, and you're like, did that really happen that way? And what I'd say for Genesis 1-11 is to first, at least, put that to the side, because that's not the most important question in the text. The most important question is, what does this mean?
Right.
And what does this mean can work on different levels. So we can return to, did this happen this way? But I don't think I want to spend too much time with that question. Make sense? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then a few other background points. One is, and I was listening to some Miroslav Volf lectures because he's like one of my favorite. He's one of the goats, the theology goats of the modern time. He's like a Yale professor. He's got he's got a crazy life that has informed his philosophy in an awesome way. But he gave a lecture, and it was just a good reminder where he talks about and something we talked about last time. The story of the universe and the story in the Bible is a story of creation and consummation. That the world was created to be united to God. And that humans were created to be a part of the process of uniting the world to God as his image. And all of that is the primary story of the Bible. It starts with creation and it ends in consummation, in the fullness of God, in the fullness of creation. And what's broken in the world and redemption from what's broken is a secondary story. Because it's not necessary for the world to break for it to be consummated with God.
Right, yeah.
But it is a part of the story.
Yeah.
And it becomes like a secondary factor that like now not only does the world need to be consummated with God, but it needs to be rescued from the state that it's in so that it can be filled full with the presence of God. So it's like a secondary element. Because I think sometimes we start with it as if it's a primary element.
Yeah.
Like, again, we're talking about the whole gospel here. I think the gospel starts with creation that is good, awaiting consummation. So if you're talking to someone and you're trying to present the gospel brand new, I think sometimes if you start with you're fallen, you're actually on step 2 instead of step 1. Instead of you are an image of God who is created for consummation with God and with creation. And you just jump to you're a bad person or something like that. That's actually later in the story that I think sometimes we act as if is the primary story. But we said this already, but the incarnation is essential to creation and consummation. But the death of Jesus is only essential because of the fallenness of humanity that comes out of these stories. So, okay, that's another layer. And then Genesis 3-11, I would say I kind of want to avoid using the word fall. And we can. I don't know.
What would be better?
I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know what's better. I just think it's not a bad word by itself. I just think
Broken relationship.
Yeah, or failure. I don't know.
Distance.
I just think when people hear the word fall, a lot of already formed thoughts about what that means comes into people's head.
Yeah.
And sometimes I like to just like take people out of those thoughts and read the stories again and let it reshape. So maybe we can use the word fall. But sometimes we also think of the fall as like one event in Genesis 3.
Right.
When Genesis 3-11 are like a series of falls and failures that sort of explain different aspects of why the universe is so messed up and isn't the world that God wants it to be yet.
Brokenness could be a good substitute.
Yeah, brokenness.
Something unnatural.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the
Well,
best
maybe
way.
something will come up as we talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Or maybe we'll just stick with fall and have to like nuance what it means. And then two other elements I want to make clear that kind of help uh, make sense of the stories as well. And these are almost like definitions, so I'll get them out of the way quick. But one, and okay, and here's the thing: Genesis 3 to 11 is philosophically dense, and I'm not trying to get lost in
Yeah.
the weeds. I'm really not trying to, but it's a tough, it's really complex literature, and it assumes a whole genre of writing we're not used to. So it does involve like sort of chipping away at assumptions that they had that we don't have. So I just want to look at two of those assumptions real quick, and then we'll go through the stories quickly. Is that good? All right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I do this practice with my students actually for my Old Testament class when we are starting in Genesis 1, because I'm always like, what does Genesis 1 start with? God, and what's with God? And they're always like, nothing. I'm like, yeah. So read the story, and they read it, and it's like the Spirit is hovering over the waters, and they're like, wait, how's there water if there's nothing? So I'm like, I try this like thing where I'm like, all right, close your eyes and imagine nothing. And then they're like, all close your eyes and try to imagine nothing. And I'm like, all right, what are you imagining? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, all right, now raise your hand if you're imagining like an empty room. And like some of them do. I'm like, all right, that's still something. So imagine nothing. And I'm like, okay, open your eyes if you're imagining, or raise your hand if you're imagining just black, the color black, or I don't know if it's a color, shade, I don't know, whatever. And like a bunch of them, and I'm like, all right, that's still something. So imagine nothing. And then I'm like, all right, now raise your hand if you're imagining the color white. And like a bunch of them raise their hand. I'm like, all right, that's still something. Imagine nothing. And then they realize it's impossible to imagine nothing. And most people just imagine like the space without stars or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But I was like, that's as close as we can get to imagining nothing. When there's still stuff there, like space without stars, there's still stuff there, even if you didn't see it. And for the ancient people, when they imagined nothing, there were like two images that came to mind: darkness and the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
because nothing survives in the ocean. I mean, fish, but nothing. No, humans can't survive in the ocean. It's to them, the ocean and darkness are nothing. And sometimes the desert they would also see as nothing, because there's nothing that can grow there. There's no people there. So if they just close their eyes and imagine nothing, I think they'd imagine a chaotic sea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because to us, that's obviously something. And I think they're not dumb. They know that's something. But it's like as close as in their imagination they can get to nothing.
Yeah.
And then God takes the sea and he brings things out of it and he orders it and he moves it around and he makes everything out of nothing. But nothing is depicted as a sea. So that's just
Right.
like,
It's like a chaotic, uncontrolled.
yeah, tohu vavohu, no order, no life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the sea. So that's one important thing, is they use the sea as this picture of nothing. And that's hard for us to grasp sometimes, because the sea is something to us, especially if you surf and you fish. And like, it's easy. Like my dad sails all the time, and it's like he lives on the sea. It's easy for him to think about the sea as a great place. But to them, it was just death and nothingness. The other one is, I want to talk just for a second. I know this could be a whole rabbit hole by itself. All of these could, but it's the idea of heaven. Because I think when we think of heaven, we think of the place that you go when you die or something like that very often. But to them, heaven was not that at all. The word for heaven just meant the skies. And for them, the way the ancient people thought, who wrote Genesis, was heaven is a invisible realm of authority over the earth, where God's presence is and where you reign from. And I think they just imagine like God's in control of everything. God created everything. God sustains everything. He's all around everything. And he's high above us, like not literally, but like ontologically. Like he's the thing everything comes from. He is the thing that reigns over everything. He sees everything. He's over everything. He has authority over everything. The best picture they could use to describe that dimension of reality is the sky or the air, either one, because the sky and the air are over everything, around everything, have a view of everything. And so when they imagine God, they talk about him as if he's in the skies. And I don't think I think ancient people aren't as dumb as we think they are sometimes. I don't think they thought God was literally up in the sky, but they use that picture as like the only imagery they have to describe something real, to say there's a realm of authority where God rules from called the heavens, where his presence is, where you have authority to rule the world. And with that definition, the Garden of Eden becomes a place that is like heaven on the land.
Right.
Because it's a place where God rules, and it's a place where people rule together. And so Adam and Eve are kind of literally in heaven when they're in the garden, because they are ruling from a high place over the universe with God. God's presence is there, God's life is there in the fruit. And it's not like they're away from the earth, they're on the earth in heaven. And that's where humans are supposed to be. But importantly, I know this is kind of a lot of info, but I'm trying my best.
Building blocks.
And sometimes these are important for later conversation that are more practical.
And it's helpful to outline the understanding of the text that was written.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't written now.
Yeah, this
obviously,
is,
right?
I mean,
So the assumptions, like you said, are outlining something that could be completely different from the way that we assume the way things are, like the idea of heaven or the uncreated nothingness, chaos, and things like that.
This is just also reading the Bible historically first,
Yeah.
like what did these words mean to them? What did they think of when they thought of these? And that takes work sometimes. And so I'm not trying to be like discouraging and just drop a ton of info, but I'm trying to like chip away at some of these ideas a little bit. For them, heaven was a reality that had like layers in a way, because they always talk about God in the highest heavens as if he has the most authority in the world.
Right.
But they also believed, the ancient people especially, believed that there were other spiritual beings at work in the world. In the Old Testament, they call them gods sometimes, or sons of God. They weren't, I want to be clear, Israel was not supposed to be polytheistic, and that they didn't worship multiple gods. But they definitely believed that there were other spiritual beings that were worshipped by other nations.
Right.
But they didn't believe they were the same level as their God, and that their God was like a different kind of being altogether. Which is why they'll talk about their God in the highest heaven, the God that created the universe in the highest heaven. But they'll talk about other gods, other spiritual beings ruling in lower heavens, that have less authority over the world, but some legitimate authority. And gods are supposed to rule in the heavens. Like that's a thing in all mythology. Like Greek mythology is probably the one people are like most familiar with Zeus and Poseidon and all them. They rule on a garden mountain that's supposed to be a place of like heaven on earth together, Mount Olympus. And they're the gods. They meet together, they rule, they make decisions together. They have different spheres of authority. So that wasn't surprising in a creation myth to say that like there's a garden mountain place that's a heaven on earth spot where God rules with his council of gods. Like that's a very normal thing to talk about. What was super surprising is to put humans there and call humans the image of God, that humans are supposed to rule with God there and grow into good rulers there.
Rather than inherently lesser beings.
Exactly.
All of this.
Yeah.
That are subjected.
Yeah.
Under. Yeah.
And importantly, humans come from nothing. Humans are not like inherently divine. They come from the dust.
Mm-hmm.
But they're given this tree of life to take in as God's own life and become these divine rulers on this heaven and earth space, become like the lowercase g gods that rule the universe in God's presence in heaven on earth in that way. That's like the human vocation.
Mm-hmm.
The human job is to grow up into that. That's the tragedy of Genesis 3 is not just that they sin because they don't trust God, but because they lose their whole job of what they were made for.
Yeah.
They fail at their whole job as becoming those kinds of divine beings on that council that can rule with God over the universe. And then last important detail that so many people miss, even though it's right there in the text, I think is really important. And it raises a lot of questions that that the Bible doesn't answer. So we can wrestle with those questions, but I don't think it's the most important question from the text. But it's that nothingness, the sea, in the creation story, God doesn't get rid of it; He just contains it.
Mm.
Like when He takes the land out of it, He calls the land good because that's like a part of creation. When He makes humans, He calls humans very good. When He makes plants, He calls them good because it's all different parts of creation. And He's like, everything I create is good. But when He splits the seas above and below, He contains them so they don't mess up everything. But He doesn't call them good. And it's actually interesting. He doesn't call day 2 good. He's just contains nothingness and leaves it there. And I think there's something there actually in that, like, God created this world, but there is bits of nothingness in this world. There's death. I mean, there's death from the beginning of the universe. Like, animals die frequently as they, like, I know people, I don't totally have an explanation for this, and you probably know better than I do, but like biological evolution is a system of death that's just like
Right.
constant.
Yeah.
Like we're like full of death throughout the history of the earth. And there's still nothingness. There's still chaos. There's still the tohu vavohu has been contained, and there is life and order in the world, but there's still disorder and death out in the world too. And the garden story in Genesis 2 starts with the desert of chaos and death, where God makes humans, but then He puts them in the garden, and the garden becomes this place of God's order and life. But it's not like the whole world is the garden.
Yeah.
The whole world is this place that has this mix of order and life and chaos and death still in it. But the garden is like this hub of what the world's supposed to be. And I think it's important that part of humanity's calling to steward and guard the garden, to become divine beings that rule the universe, is that creation, we said this before, but I think it just sometimes needs to be said over and over again. Creation starts as a project, not perfect.
Yeah, right.
It starts as a project that starts with nothingness and is growing towards consummation, fullness of God's order and life.
Yeah, that's really important
Mhm.
just to lay out that it's just the beginning. Like the creation story and humans being in the garden is the very beginning of this grand plan, of this grand sort of progression.
Yeah.
And it ends early, this
Right.
plan.
Yeah.
Like with the optimum
Is a
plan,
hang up. Yeah.
there's a hang up, but it wasn't, yeah.
But it wasn't made done and then
Right.
messed up.
There was
Humanity is depicted. We talked about this. Adam and Eve are sort of depicted as these babies that need to grow into being who they truly are.
Yeah.
Like babies grow into being full human beings. If we define human beings as like people that can walk and talk and do, which I know it's not a good definite. Like, I'm not saying they're not, babies aren't human beings, but there's this picture of like growing up and maturing into your destiny, and that's what they're called to do. And then creation itself needs to mature into its destiny, becoming one with God and being full of God's order in life. But it's not that way yet. Only the garden is. The whole world should be heaven and earth together, but only the garden is this spot of heaven and earth together. And there's this tree in the garden that represents determining order in the world in your own way. So John Walton points this out a lot. He's like, in Genesis, like the whole thing is about life and order. They're not yet thinking in terms of like these complex ideas maybe we have of sin and righteousness, even though maybe that's there on some level. But they're thinking humanity's job is to spread God's order and life throughout the world. The garden is a place of order and life. Outside of the garden is a place of disorder and death. Humanity, in its natural state, is dying, but has a chance, because of they're in the garden, to become one with God, share God's divine life, and become united with Him in some way, and live forever. But instead of eating from that tree, they eat from a tree where they can determine good from bad on their own. They're supposed to grow in knowledge of becoming like they're supposed to know what's good and bad, right? That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because then you know how to be wise and how to live. And um, but they're supposed to learn it from God. They're not supposed to just take it thinking that God's holding out on them on something.
Right.
I think that's really important too. Because we talked about this sacramental view of the world, like that the world is a gift from God. Everything in the world conveys God's life and presence to you. You're supposed to enjoy God through creation. But where they really, really, really mess up is when they hear from a snake that God is actually holding out and that there's something that they could have if they just took it instead of waiting for God to bless them with it anyway.
Yeah.
And they take it, and it's sort of like this picture of like when you're too young and experience something that's for adults, and it just messes with you. And it's this picture. They take wisdom they're not ready for. They take experiencing, because knowledge, again, in Hebrew doesn't just mean like knowing something, but it has to do with experience as well. Experiencing and knowing and deciding good and evil for yourself rather than trusting God's definition of what's good and what's bad and growing into that wisdom. And so they choose to order the world the way they want to order it, which means they are removing themselves from God's ordered world and life and going out into the world of death and chaos.
Yeah.
And again, the reason why I do all that background, I'm yapping a lot, and you can feel free to interrupt me, is just because I think sometimes we get this picture of like the whole world is perfect and humanity is perfect with God, but we make one little mistake,
And then the whole thing.
and then the whole thing, like the whole world descends into chaos, and animals start eating each other, and then everything goes crazy. Instead of actually, this is a project. The whole world is in chaos. We're supposed to be part of the solution. Because we're supposed to be God's heralds, representatives, vice regents
Yeah.
that bring his order and life into the world. But instead, we want to do it our own way, and we remove ourselves from the geography of God's life and presence, and we leave heaven on earth, and we just go into hell on earth instead. We go into the tohu vavohu parts of the earth, and we make our home there, and we live that way under the fear of death, where we are try to order the world what's best for me.
Right.
Instead of
Make the world idols.
yes,
Like
yeah,
idolize different parts of the world that are actually supposed to be good.
yes. See creation as an end to itself rather than a gift from God.
Yeah.
Don't trust God that you're going to live and be taken care of and ordered, but live in a world of chaos and scarcity and death, and they let that motivate the way they act.
This reminds me of something I heard before multiple times, but I've heard a comment about like creation and like this gift from God and what humans are supposed to do as like stewards of the world.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like misconception about people take this stewardship to mean like subjugation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like humans are supposed to subjugate the world and like get everything it's worth, and like like
It's like
and
that
somehow this like translates into being like industrious, and like, oh, like I'm gonna chop the trees and make myself a house,
as if we have a
like,
right because we're the image of God to do whatever we want. To the
right?
rest
Which
of
is
the
so
universe.
not true. I mean, obviously, like to me at least, this idea of like harmonious life and appreciating the gifts from God and living in this world with God doesn't, to me, look like deforestation and all these like
No.
like
Well, okay.
like we
yeah.
would obviously do it in a good way. That so
Yes.
that's
No,
always bugged me when people
that's-
are like, take this earth and like I don't remember the exact quote from Genesis, but like
subdue it.
right, subdue it as if like it's this total like bad like that it's gonna end up being like what the world is now, where it's like
That's a
talk about like global warming and
that's a great
stuff,
point. Like I know people too. You're like, oh, there's
I'm
pollution.
pretty sure that's not
How do
what
we
that's supposed to mean.
how do we solve it? And people are like, oh, it doesn't matter because we're the image of God.
Right,
And
so
there's
just
this
do whatever we
world
want.
to
I'm like,
subdue.
okay.
When I think it's actually really clear, like God is the ruler of the world. The world is God's. And God rules it, as we've seen so far in Genesis, through ordering it and causing it to be fruitful with life.
Yeah.
And then when humans are called to rule the world, they're supposed to do it by imaging God, by ordering it so it produces fruitfulness and life, like a garden, like ordering the
Not
garden,
ruining it.
not
Because they
ruining it.
can.
And spreading chaos and disorder and death in it is the opposite
Yeah.
of subduing. It is the opposite of imaging God. It is imaging nothingness. It is imaging death and chaos and disorder into the world.
Yeah.
There's this picture that Bible Project has a whole series on that's actually really interesting, where it's like, if the sea is nothingness, there's this theme throughout the Bible of like this chaos dragon that lives in the sea. And it calls different people chaos dragons at different times. And what it means
Like
is...
Leviathan, right?
Yeah, like Leviathan
Yeah.
or the Tanin in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
And it's this picture of like, if it calls different kings chaos dragons, it calls like Pharaoh or Nebuchadnezzar chaos dragons. And the idea is, it's like, if the sea is nothingness, which means death, because death is just a return to nothingness where you come from, or disorder, because that's like, it's like a parasite on the order God created, dragging creation back into nothingness. Then to live in the nothingness and have mastery over it, like a chaos dragon, sea dragon that lives in the sea, is like you've become an agent of nothingness. You dwell there, you spread that, you are like this door or portal of death and chaos to spread into the world, and you are part of dragging creation back into nothing where it came from, rather than finding its fullness in merging with God, its creator.
I think that's a perfect segue into the whole idea of idolatrous grasping of these things of the world, and then how that continues to cascade in the future chapters of Genesis.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So, the failure of Genesis 3 you're supposed to see and be like, oh my gosh, no, is not just like, oh, this woman and her husband broke a rule and now we all have to die because they broke a rule or something like that. It's humanity. Like, their names are human and life. So humanity is supposed to live in heaven with God on earth. They're supposed to live in God's presence. They're supposed to share God's life. They're supposed to transcend their bodies of death and become united to God in some way. They're supposed to grow up into becoming lowercase g God-like figures, like that spread life and order and rule the cosmos in love, in flourishing and fruitfulness in life. That's their job. And as John Walton says, they have sort of a functional ontology, which just means, it's a fancy way of saying that the ancient people thought of people's jobs as like their purpose almost.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is humanity's purpose. This is who they are. This is what it means to be a human being, is to be one who is called to spread that order and life in the world. But when they mess up and reject God's wisdom and rely on their own, they're not just breaking one rule. They are rejecting their job and giving up their office, which is like they're separating themselves from God's presence, which is not just a relational brokenness, even though that is also a huge part of it that's supposed to be devastating. It's also our whole purpose we're not living up to. And then the curses God lists, like, it doesn't say, it's important, it doesn't actually say pain in childbearing, but it says anxiety in child conceiving. And we can get into that some other time, but like, and it says anxiety in working the land. So you're not going to get enough fruit from the land, your food. There's going to be dysfunctional family systems. Like, you're not going to have kids in the way you want to have kids. And then the whole rest of Genesis is like these dysfunctional marriages or incest or gross things and famine and chaos. And it's just like this picture of like being fruitful and multiplying is part of ruling the world well, like bringing order, bringing life. That's going to be really hard when you go out of the garden and go into the realm of chaos and death. That's the curse. It's not like God is like, zap, I curse you with now you're going to be really anxious.
No, it's a natural result and progression of the choices that are made.
It's the result of leaving the garden. It's the result of leaving heaven and going out into chaos and death. Yeah. When you say, oh, I'm going to choose to order the world my way And I'm like, okay, you have to do that out there where
Now you have to deal with all the
you have
consequences
to deal with
of that.
all the consequences of that.
Yeah.
But it's not without hope because God promises, and then also, sorry, that another curse or like big problem is that there's animosity between the man and the woman too.
Yeah.
And that gets played out in different ways, but
I think that's
there's
really important, that concept, because
yeah,
later in the Bible, just following this, I mean, whatever we want to call it, brokenness, fallenness, whatever,
failure, yeah,
taking matters into our own hands kind of thing. There is this inequality that forms then between men
yeah,
and women
yeah,
that is like
because they're
a
called
huge theme, especially in like these warring kingdoms
yes,
and things like that, is like domination of men over women and
yes,
how that's a
yeah.
fallen state of creation.
Totally,
Because I
because they're called to rule together,
right,
man and woman,
yeah,
and they're called to be fruitful and multiply together. They have different roles in that sometimes because, like, she gives birth and whatever, but they're called as these equal partners that represent God and image God together.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, there's this hierarchy that's introduced when things go wrong, and it's not good. And actually, that gets built on with Cain's grandson as well. That's like the first guy to have 2 wives and treat them like property, and he's also a serial killer. You're like, "All right." So
lovely,
it just shows how depraved humanity is becoming
yeah,
and how broken this all is. But anyway, they get this promise that a human being, like the seed of the woman, will crush the seed of the snake, and it's like chaos will not win, disorder will not win, order in life, the creation will be consummated. Creation will merge with God's presence. God will make his home in creation. There will be a seventh day rest, but it will only happen when humans take up their job and do what they're supposed to do in ruling the world well. So God promises that a human being will get humanity back on track. And that's this hope that you get at the end of the story there. But they leave the garden as an act of mercy from God because he's like, I don't want you guys living eternally in this state. So dying is kind of a mercy in a sense that you don't live forever like this. And then you get these series of things getting worse and worse and worse. So Cain and Abel, slightly worse story. They same almost reaction in Cain where he's like, God's holding out on me. There's something
yeah,
that I need that God's not giving me, so I'm going to take it myself, just like Adam and Eve. And he kills his brother, and it's the first murder. And it's like this image of God dies, and that's a big deal in the story. And then it devolves worse and worse, and Lamech, his grandson, again, we were talking about, he has multiple wives, serial killer. He's like, I kill 70 times 7 the amount of people that Cain did and all this stuff. And we just see humanity devolving it societally into this chaotic state. And death, which would not have been an issue for them if they would have lived in God's wisdom in the garden, becomes an issue for them all over. Becomes the issue for them. And they make all their decisions based on their fear of death
mm-hmm.
rather than assuming life and flourishing. So I guess the reason I didn't want to use the word fall, just to reiterate,
yeah,
is because I think when people hear fall, they hear primarily, I was supposed to be Adam and Eve were supposed to be perfect people, but they made a mistake. They sinned, and therefore they separated themselves from God, which is partially true. It is, but it misses the whole fact that they were supposed to be images of God and what that job meant, and the importance of that in uniting creation to God, and that whole project has to be put on hold now until humanity
yeah,
gets their stuff together. And that's an even bigger story. Like morals are a part of that, but it's not the part of that. It is just a part of that. Because you're not just being a good person in order to be a good person. You're being a good person in order to reflect God's rule and love and life into the world so that you can unite creation to the
mm-hmm.
Father. Anyway, so that's just like another layer. You know what I mean? And I think fallenness sometimes flattens that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. A few more layers of weirdness, and then we'll wrap up. I don't know. Maybe if this one's too long, maybe it'll be 2. We'll see how it
Okay.
goes. So we get all those that failure, and then we get a weird story about the gods, the sons of God, the other spiritual beings that God created to rule within the heavens, come down from the heavens. This is in Genesis 6. They see human daughters. They take them. and they have children with them, and because they think they're beautiful. And then and then it says these were in the days that the Nephilim, these giant warrior kings of old, ruled the world. And then it says and that because of that, basically they were all violent. They needed a flood to sort of reset the world. Okay, flood to the side. Weird story.
Yeah, it's super short too.
Super short, not a
Little
lot of
snippet,
detail.
and you're like,
Really
okay.
strange. It doesn't specifically say the Nephilim giants were the children,
Mm,
but that is sort of assumed by later interpreters, because it's like, why else would it bring it up right then? But I think what it's doing there is actually really like complex and interesting. But like then we get like the Book of Enoch written way later, and actually in my classroom, one of the questions I get the most is about the Book of Enoch because there's all these TikToks about the Book of Enoch and how it's like this
no, yeah,
secret
okay.
weird book.
Sure.
It's not a secret book. It's essentially like fan fiction about the Torah written by ancient Jewish people around Jesus' day, where they read these old stories in their Torah in Genesis, and they're like, oh, that leaves a ton of questions. Let's write the story about like, what if this is how all the gaps got filled in? Which isn't the same as scripture, I would say. It
Yeah.
doesn't have the same level of authority or whatever, but is important for saying, oh, this is how people then read that story or understood that story. But it's a weird story. So just putting to side, like, can spiritual beings actually do that and take on human form and sleep with,
Right.
like, all that to the side. Again, we're sweeping all of these, like, how would that happen to the side, and just what does this mean? Um, and a lot of historians have pointed this out. Like, all ancient nations claimed that they were founded by gods.
Or they had authority from God.
Or had authority from gods.
Yeah.
Assyria, Babylon, Sumeria, all these like surrounding nations that Israel would have looked around and seen all the time. They would claim, our founder is divine in some way. We have warrior king, god kings like Pharaoh. They are divine in some way. They got their authority from the gods, and they learned their instruction or tools from the gods. Like Babylon, they had these stories of the gods coming down and teaching them how to build swords, how to make weapons of war, how to strategize for war. And in the Book of Enoch, when they flesh out this story a little bit, it's the story of these spiritual beings coming down. It's sort of like the spiritual being fall story to go along with the human fall story. Where these gods that are supposed to rule with God on his divine counsel in the heavens come down, take something they think looks good, just like Eve took the apple, or not apple, but fruit that she thought looked good, and did something terrible. And then the result are these giant warrior kings that found all the nations.
Yeah.
Yeah, found all the nations. Which is why it's like the origin story to the Tower of Babel in a way. But like that, all these kings, and then in Enoch, these spiritual beings like teach those kings how to build swords, weapons of warfare, strategize for war, all those things. And I think what Genesis is doing is looking at the creation myths of all these other stories and saying, okay, if you're all claiming that all of your leaders are divine and chosen by the gods and representative of those gods, sure, maybe they are, but that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And they're lesser gods, not the real supreme God that's over all of them. And they're lesser spiritual beings or angels or something like that. They're not the God. And they are these mutant hybrids that are not good. If they learned wisdom, it was bad wisdom. It was how to spread chaos and death. And their violence was the reason for the destruction of the world. So it's like sort of mocking the gods of all the other nations around them, or the kings of all the other nations around them in this really big way. But it sets up this theme, this allegorical pattern or this typological pattern that you see, where it's like whenever you see these kings that act in their own self-interest, that murder millions or thousands of people, that spread chaos and death, that have become like chaos dragons, you're supposed to be like, there is a spiritual evil behind this nation, behind
Yeah.
these kings that are closely tied together. That like when you see a Hitler figure, you're not just supposed to see one evil guy. You're supposed to see an evil power behind it. And that becomes a big theme from this story also. So weird story. I don't think the point is you're supposed to be looking for giant bones to prove that they existed or something like that.
Sure.
I think the point is first and foremost, like when you see dictators of nations, or nations founded on power or greed that claim divine origin, that is not a good divine origin. It's a spiritual evil behind it. And it's not like nations today ever claim divine origin either.
Yeah, it's actually the opposite.
Well,
Some it depends. I would say like something that I think of in the idea of like dictators. So there's a lot of dictatorships and things like that that just claim atheism
yeah, that's true.
or just
Especially
chaos, which
after-
might be sort of a deification in of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Of some kind.
Of just chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
All right.
But I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, this line between the representation of like evil forces in the form of like what nations put their faith into,
Yes.
like
yeah.
power and greed
Mhm.
and things like that, but also recognizing the presence of real spiritual forces and like
yes.
what that
So-
means. Because there's like a balance between like, because we think of like, I would say it's a popular thing that people have this idea of like, what is like Satan? Is that
Yes.
a
yeah.
person? Like, is that, or not
Yes.
a person, but
Yeah.
an actual, I don't know, being.
Personality.
Yeah, a
of some
personality,
kinds.
because there's this conception that maybe it's like the equal and opposite of God, which
Yes.
I very much think it is not.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not as if Satan has an equal power of God and is like the evil shadow version
That's-
of God.
yes,
I
that's
just
really
don't
important.
think that's true.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, but recognizing that there's like real things trying to work as agents of chaos.
Yes. Okay. So that's perfect tie-in. I think that's really, really, really important. The ancient people assumed, it was like obvious to them, there are spiritual powers in the world that are at work behind nations, behind people, behind motivations, that there are forces in the world that corrupt and cause chaos. How we talk about those forces today is complicated. And we,
Yeah.
we should try to get into like, how should we understand it? How should we think about it? Imperfectly, because we don't totally know. It's something that's invisible and something, but they assumed, I would say the ancient people assumed those forces were real. N.T. Wright always says they don't have great language for how to describe those forces because Paul doesn't call them gods. Paul calls them the Satan as one like big leader or whatever. The principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, thrones in the spiritual world, in the heavenly places,
Yeah.
the hosts of heaven. He calls them all those things. Genesis calls them the gods on the divine council, because that is the world they lived in. They looked around, all the nations are worshiping their gods, and they see their kings as the reflection of their gods, and they're spreading chaos and death. So to them, that would have been natural to say. It makes us a little uncomfortable sometimes because we're like, whoa, there's only one God. And yes, there's only one capital G God that creates, sustains the universe. That's his own kind of being. That is being itself. That is life itself. But they took for granted that there were these other lower spiritual beings in the universe that were invisible forces in the world. And they sometimes called them gods in Genesis. Sometimes they called them sons of God.
And in Job too.
And
They're
in
referred to as
Job,
sons of God, this
yes,
council.
this council that God makes decisions with.
Yeah.
And some of them are forces of creation that work with God, bringing his order and life in creation. And some of them have become chaos dragons and spread chaos and death. And
Every time you say chaos dragon, I just kind of want to laugh.
yeah, it's okay. They have become doors of death and destruction in the world. So when you see this snake in this garden, it's like this embodiment of
Yeah.
chaos and death. It doesn't call him Satan. I think that's actually important for Genesis. Chaos monsters are a normal part of creation myth, and it is sort of like a little chaos monster in the garden, the snake figure. But it is it is taken for granted for them that these are beings that exist, and it depicts them as gods that are a part of a divine council of some kind. So, however we conceive of this in our modern cosmology.
Okay.
Sorry, took a break. However we conceive of this in our modern cosmology. Putting that to the side, how does this actually work? What do these actually look like? With the words that they had in the imagination that they use, where the sea represents nothingness, where the skies represent God's reign of authority or other people's reign of authority, whatever you want to call it. They believe there were these minds or agents or forces in the world that were meant to steward the world towards good as well. And some of them failed in a reflection of the way humanity failed, and caused chaos and death in the world. And the evidence of that is when you look at these kings or nations that become these doors of chaos and death in the world.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be like, there's actually these invisible agents or forces of chaos and death behind them as well. And that really leads into the Tower of Babel story, because I think a lot of people think the Tower of Babel story is like this origin story of languages, which is definitely
Right. Yeah.
how it's depicted in kids' books and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that. And I think that really undersells it, because it's supposed to be the climax of failures. It is the biggest failure.
Climax of
in the
failures
series of
and like
failures.
humans being like, now we got it, and it's like it's this homogenization
Yes,
of humanity in a way that God was like,
this is not how
Huh,
humanity's supposed to be. Yeah,
right.
yeah. Because all these humans get together, they speak the same language, and they dominate, and they build this tower that's supposed to be like this temple that
Yeah.
connects them to the heavens. They're building their own Eden, their own way, their own order. It's like this counter
Which
Eden.
is like the ultimate
force.
spiritual evil.
It is.
force.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like they are building their own garden in this temple. They're building. They're becoming their own. They're worshiping creation rather than the creator. They see creation as an end to itself, and they want to control God rather than submitting to God's will and ruling His way.
And that's replicated later,
Yeah.
right? Like
Sorry.
these big kingdoms and things like that. And I think of Rome, right? Rome is like the
Yes.
big one that people talk
Yeah.
about, especially in the New Testament, right? It's seen as like
Yes.
the beast. And
And it's significant that the last story in these series of failures is the development of the city of Babylon. Like Babylon, same word, important. Some people don't realize that. Babylon. And Babylon becomes this archetype, this pattern of this chaotic evil. And Rome is even called Babylon when it's acting in this
Right.
way. And part of the thing that God sees wrong is that all humanity acts in a uniform way. Like God created humanity for diversity under His reign, and in different expressions of different languages and different things. And when everyone is forced to act the same way, He sees that as an evil. That's
and ironically, Israel does the same thing.
It
Every
does.
time
It has-
Israel's like tries to do the same thing, and God's like,
Yes.
"Come on, guys."
It calls Israel Babylon in those moments as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's important the judgment God puts on humanity in that time, like the result where God's like, this isn't going to work, guys. Is He spreads them into different nations in different languages, and spreads them all over the world. And when Moses retells that event in Deuteronomy 32, he says that this was the moment. And it's weird because it's not obvious from the text, but it's interesting that Moses sees that moment as sort of this disinheriting of God of humanity. It's like if humanity's God's children, they've officially given up their status as children of God. And God wants to reclaim all the nations back into a one family. But this is like the climax moment of God disinheriting the nations because they've rejected Him so much. And it says that God dispersed the nations. It says, but like back in the day of old, ask your grandparents and they will tell you, it's part of this like song Moses is singing, that God dispersed the nations into the number of the sons of God. Like into however many gods there are, God's justice on them, judgment on them, was handing them over to the spiritual forces. So when Israel looks around and sees all these nations worshiping their own gods, and they see humans enslaved to spiritual forces of chaos and death. And they see that as God's judgment on them for rejecting God in the first place. So the question arises, like, if we're not living under God's kingdom, if this whole thing is about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, as Matthew calls it, this the reign of heaven on earth, the reign of God on earth, the world the way God wants it to be, full of flourishing and life. That looks like humanity ruling in the heavens on earth with God, spreading his order in life. If we don't live there anymore and we're kicked out of the garden, whose reign are we living under? And Genesis's answer is the reign of these spiritual agents of death and chaos that we worship. Like when we give our allegiance to creation rather than the creator, when we think that God's holding out on us, when we see creation as an ends to itself rather than something else, when we take these forces that are supposed to be good, like sex or power or money or whatever, and misuse them and worship them, live our whole lives around them instead of around God, we are giving our allegiance to these forces that represent those things rather than God himself. And we enslave ourselves to the gods. And ultimately to this enemy, this Satan. And Satan just means adversary.
Yeah.
It just means this enemy, this one who's against everything rather than for anything. That's trying to tear the world back into nothingness. We submit ourselves to that rather than to God when we live our lives our own way. And we are under the reign of those beings instead of God. And importantly, this is two big factors here. One, we are supposed to be in that place. We are supposed to be the image of God that is ruling the universe. And instead, we are giving our job to these spiritual beings that we are worshiping, that we are letting run the universe instead. We submit to their way of doing life. And that's sort of like giving up our jobs and giving them to these spiritual beings of evil. And that's one big thing they see is wrong with the world, is that these spiritual beings are not supposed to have that job. And we are supposed to embody God's life in that place. And two, like, it's not like these spiritual beings are these like little imps or demons like running around killing people and causing mischief, like in like a cartoon. They very realistically thought, like, when you see evil empires, when you see systems of chaos and death, when you see political systems that cause starvation, that cause injustice, that cause financial burdens, that cause death, that cause chaos, there is a real evil spiritual force behind it that we are subjugating ourselves to. It's a lot easier when you live in a culture like that to imagine that. Like if you imagine ancient Greece, and you imagine you're a Greek and you're like, oh, I automatically believe that there's a god of chaos, a god of war, a god of sex, a god of money, a god of all these things. And you literally go worship that god in order to have more sex or money or whatever. You are literally giving your allegiance to that created thing. And it causes chaos and death rather than giving your allegiance to God. In our culture where we don't actually literally go do those things, it's harder to see. But it's not like we don't live our lives or people don't live their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Like living their lives around money, sex, power.
It becomes your whole personality.
Yes.
It becomes the way that you orient your life, your priorities.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And like you said, these spiritual beings, these Satan and these powers or whatever you want to call them that rule the cosmos instead of God, that we give our allegiance to, that cause chaos and death, these are not threats to God. These are not like two equal opposite forces fighting each other. It's not like this dualistic, like God is all good, Satan and these powers are all bad, and either of them could win. But whatever.
Right. It's an active choice that we are using to erode the chance that we can rekindle this relationship with God and renew our relationship to the created things as intended and good.
Exactly. We're enslaving ourselves to it. Yeah. They're threats to us,
right?
But they're not threats to God. But they're threats to us because we are subjecting ourselves to it, and we have become slaves to them. And it's visible through the corruption of kings and death and whatever. Mm-hmm. They are just lower level things that have misused their power the way we are lower level things and misused our power. I don't know if we talked about this already. I don't think we have, But Matthew Croasmun from Yale, when he talks about spiritual beings today, he often uses the metaphor of like cells and a human. I don't know if we talk about this.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah,
you're a
yeah.
cell guy. Histology.
Histology. Yeah.
Cell guy. But like how every cell is alive by itself. It's an independent organism in a way. But together they make up me. And I'm not just a construct that these cells create. I'm a real living organism myself. But I'm also dependent on these living organisms to survive. And do I control these cells or do these cells control me? It's a weird symbiotic relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a real independent being, and these are
Right.
real independent beings.
Yeah.
Or some people say that like bees independently act more like cells. They don't have their own distinct personalities.
This is like a hive.
But
mind
a
kind of
hive
thing.
has a personality, and different hives can have different personalities from each other, even though bees don't
Right.
necessarily.
Different levels of organization.
Right.
That's how it works.
Yeah. So he
You
uses
could say like a stomach behaves independently of the cells that make it up, and then to a higher order, an organ system, and then the organism as a human.
There you go. Yeah. There's different
That's
levels.
how it's defined, the hierarchy of life and organization. Yeah.
Yeah. So they would say like he uses that to help us understand spiritual beings, because he says like there are theologians throughout Christian history like Rudolf Bultmann who say, oh, these spiritual beings are just metaphors. They're metaphors for political systems. They're metaphors for economic systems. They're metaphors for kingdoms. They're metaphors for the injustice that are caused by these complex human structures. Or you could be like a Catholic superstitious guy who's like, there's a demon around every corner.
Yeah.
There's these hyper human-like personalities that are pulling the strings, that have all this power that we have to like name and cast out in like a dramatic way. When he's like trying to find this tension in between, like you said, is this a real personality? Is this something where he's like, these are created agents that are good, made to be good, that have been corrupted. So they're not just embodiments of nothingness, but they're whatever. But he uses like humans are like these cells that make up these structures. But these structures tend to have a personality that is bigger than the humans that make it up. And these become these powers that enslave us and have power over us, that are real, that are these gods in a sense.
Yeah.
That are real beings independent themselves because we make them up. So like Nazi Germany is an easy example. It's like you can look at that as this complex system of this evil dictator, these bad philosophies, and these people following orders and doing terrible things, or these people that are genuinely like evil, and this complex system of people. Or you can be like, there's actually spiritual evil that is more than the sum of its parts.
Right, the movement itself.
Yes, that is just causing chaos and death. That seems like the sea dragon that lives in chaos and death and spreads chaos and death and nothingness all over creation, just corrupts and destroys what's good and living. And they would say there is a real spiritual god of evil behind that. Again, maybe if people aren't comfortable with the way I'm saying God, but like lowercase g God. I'm trying to make clear, like spiritual being. By God, it just means spiritual being.
You could like demon.
Power.
You could
yes.
say. Yeah.
Demon is actually just like Greek daimon for little god.
Yeah.
So this is what it means. Little god. Little daimon is demon or whatever behind it that is causing chaos and death. That controls the people in a way. Like it has a grasp on the people. When the people join it, they're caught up in whatever you want to call it, mob mentality or whatever, but it controls the people as much as the people created it. And that humans and these bigger minds of systems always exists in like relationship to each other, but in these malformed ways where we give allegiance to them in this dysfunctional way instead of imaging God and taking on that role ourselves. So whether you buy that or not, or find that helpful or not, and they would say like Satan is like this picture of the world, all the world's evil and death in this one being, that human hearts that are transformed away from sin and death is the destruction of that being. Like that would be one activity. But this again, it's not just a metaphor for those systems, but that those systems are real beings in and of themselves of a different kind, that have their own minds, their own personalities, and their own way of operating. And I think that's an interesting way to put it, at least.
Yeah.
that helps us in a modern age make sense of this. But in their era, they didn't have like in Genesis, they don't mind being like, oh yeah, these gods that look like human kings that operate like human kings of our time in these divine councils that make decisions together by talking. That's the best way they can put it.
Mm-hmm.
So, to be clear, when Genesis 3 through 11 is answering the question, what's wrong with the world? Why don't we live in the kingdom of God now? Or like, why doesn't it look like God's reign is being done on the earth? It gives a really complicated story, series of stories that give a very complex answer, where the answer is sin, sure, but it's not sin in just moral failure. Sin means failure. Sin means failure. Sin means just missing a mark, right? But it's not just the mark of moral perfection. It's the mark of being the image of God, fulfilling your vocation to bring order and life to the world, to bring world into consummation with God, creation. So it all serves this main story of creation, like out of nothing, moving towards consummation and fullness of God. But now there's a disruption in the story. And the disruption is humanity has lost has failed their vocation. And now, instead of living in heaven on earth with God and spreading that to other places, they submit to these
Serving our own gods.
We serve our own gods. Who we let take our place in ruling the cosmos. And that's manifested through these nations. So idolatry fundamentally is the root of the problem of humanity. It's not like sin is the root and idolatry is just one kind of sin. It's more like idolatry is the root and sin is just the result of living a life in idolatry.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing said about like pride, pridefulness in taking our own path.
Yeah.
Sort of similarly.
Yes, completely. I think it's sort of the root of all the other sin. It's our failure is just a manifestation of us trying to order the world our own way and therefore submitting to creation, and living our life as if created things are gods and of themselves, right, rather than God himself. Right. And handing over our authority to these, enslaving ourselves to these spiritual beings. So the question that okay, how is God going to fix creation? How is God going to bring his reign over all the universe? Becomes a question not just of how is God going to forgive us? Because I think that's often where people stop. They're like, now how is God going to forgive us? Because he could actually just forgive us if he wants to forgive us. But how is God going to bring humanity back into their role of ruling in the heavenly places with him over creation and bringing creation into fulfillment? How is God going to get humans to get to that place? How is God going to transform humans into growing up like Adam and Eve never got to grow up outside of the garden? How is he going to bring them into that place? How is God going to defeat the powers that we have given ourselves over to, that rule the world instead, that we let reign over the world? It's a lesser reign, it's not like, again, it's not like two opposite equal kingdoms, one evil and God's good one, and they're at battle with each other. God is still generating, sustaining everything, so he's still in charge of everything on some level. But he's let his reign, he shared his reign with us, and we've given our reign to these beings of evil. And so now he has to take out these reigns of evil and replace it with his reign again, with the reign of a human being, because the reign of a human being is what his reign is supposed to look like. So it's a way bigger story. And the gospel, the good news that the kingdom of God is here, is not just a good news that you're forgiven. Again, that's part of it. That's an important part of it. It's a central part of it. But it's a way bigger story too. That's like, how are these spiritual beings' kingdoms going to be defeated? How is humanity going to take its place again, ruling with God in the heavenly places on earth? How is he going to spread life and reign all over the earth? How is creation going to reach consummation? Are we going to transcend chaos and death and become people of life and order instead? And that's a way bigger story. So sin and fall are important words, but sin means giving up our place in that vocation and living subject to these powers. and fall means losing that vocation as well. So as long as we mean that, I think those are important words.
Yeah.
But I think often we reduce those to something lesser,
Right.
to just like a moral failure or just like a corruption of some kind. So that's Genesis 3 through 11. Complex. Sorry, that's a lot of info. It's a complex, but I think it's an important building block for like when Jesus says the kingdom of God has arrived. That has all these implications. That
And it
means
doesn't look the way that you think.
no, but people would be thinking, okay, that means there needs to be a king who's going to rule the way humans were supposed to rule in the garden, who's going to be like a mature Adam and Eve, what they would have been like if they would have fully embraced God. They'd think that means that Rome, the Babylon of their day, that reflects the spiritual evil of their day or the Satan of their day, is going to be defeated, and that God's kingdom is going to take its place, and that spiritual evil will be done for. It means that chaos and death will be undone. So it's all of these wrapped into this story. So we said before, the kingdom of God is a story. It's a complex, progressing story of the history of humanity. And it means humanity taking its place again, ruling with God, which is a very high view of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one that people would not typically take.
No, even Christians, I think, again, if we
have a
Yeah.
historically pretty poor view of ourselves
yes, and
and our role.
I think, there's some good humility in that sometimes, but I think the point, like when we say the gospel, like I've heard people be like, as long as you're preaching the gospel, which is you're messed up, you need God, he loves you and embrace you anyway, now you're good. It's like, that's like 1/10 of the gospel. The gospel is you were created to rule the universe with God in humanity. You were created to rule in a heaven on earth spot and grow into a lowercase g God of sharing in God's own life and spreading his life and order throughout the world. And you, along with all of humans, have failed that mission because we live in a world of death now. And we all are motivated by death, and we're all submit ourselves to the spiritual evil dominions and chaos in the world. And God has come and conquered the spiritual evil and chaos in the world so that you could be a heir to his kingdom again, which has come and is coming. That's such a bigger story. That's so much, and I get why we don't say that, because it invites so many more questions.
Yeah.
And it's way harder to maybe grasp on the first, like, whatever. But I think
I can imagine a lot of crazy comments on this video.
yes, I know. There are going to be, dude, there's going to be Nephilim comments. I know it. And again, that's not even the point that we're trying to get across. I've seen the articles, they're fake. That's not the point.
It's crazy coming from an evangelical.
But the point is, like,
Sorry.
the gospel is this grand narrative of humans reigning with God. The problem is a bigger cosmic problem of submitting ourselves to these powers of chaos and death, and letting death rule us rather than transcending it by uniting ourselves to God's life. And it's so much more interesting. It's so much.
Yeah.
It's so much more compelling. It's so much, yeah. And God's solution to this is what we'll talk about next time. It doesn't start with Jesus, but it climaxes with the story of Jesus, and it builds, and it involves an imagination, I guess, from an ancient way of viewing the world that we don't always have. But that's okay. I think we can retell the story in our own way, but we can't limit the story to just like we messed up and now someday we're gonna be good.
Yeah.
No, someday we're gonna be united with God's life and live forever in a realm of the world that we currently live in that's different. Anyway, I'm getting riled up. But yeah, it's a better story. It's a better story. And it's compelling, and it's crazy, and it's hard to believe sometimes, but it is way better than we sometimes make the gospel. So again, if you're going to sum up the gospel, it's not you messed up or Eve messed up and it sucks for you because you're born messed up, but God loves you anyway. So he sent his son to die for you, and now he forgives you, and now you can live with him. Like, that's good, but that's not as exciting as or even just as, it's not as biblical as humanity was created to image God and rule on his behalf in the cosmos. We've given up that role to these lesser spiritual beings, and now we serve it and are enslaved to them. And sin is just our failure to be fully human, by serving these beings instead of God, evidenced by our actions, and the brokenness of this world. But God has come to heal the world. But first, he has to heal you because you're in charge of the world.
Yeah.
And he's going to do that by defeating these powers we're enslaved in, so that we can be fully ourselves in him again, and take our place in the heavens on earth by becoming places of heaven on earth ourselves. I keep getting lost in the sauce, but
Okay.
yeah. So that makes evangelism different too, and we can talk about that down the road. But like, that's just because how you tell that story in different contexts is different. Because some cultures take spiritual evil more seriously than others, and you have to describe it differently based on your context. Some contexts take personal evil or is more assumed than others. You know, in America, I think a lot of people just think they're good people, and therefore the story might not start with you're a bad person, because I don't think a lot of people are convinced by that immediately. It might start with there are evil structures of systems in the world that we are subject to, and I think more people in California would be like, that's true. And you'd be like, there's a solution to that.
Yeah.
And then you can get to human evil as a result of that. But I don't think you have to start there the same way you have to start there, and maybe another place where that's more obvious. You know, because the story is all encompassing, and it works on a lot of levels. So
Cool.
yeah,
I'm excited to get to the next part.
yeah,
I think it's great to be able to talk about the story of what comes after that, because it's so
Yeah.
rich. Especially, I've learned to appreciate the Old Testament and the story
Yes.
behind the Old Testament. Like in the last couple of years, I did a big deep dive into the progression of what God's people like do
Yeah.
over and over, the patterns that they have, and then how that ends up turning into Jesus' time and what they do then. And
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting.
I've learned more and more of the church fathers whenever they want to explain who Jesus is, what Jesus did, what the gospel is, they always go to the Old Testament,
Mhm.
which they call the scriptures, you know? And that's just the story for them. They're like, Jesus is in this story. This is how we know who Jesus is. This is our good news. And yeah, I think that's spot on. I think also Genesis 12, right after Genesis 11, hits a lot harder, where it's like, now all the nations are enslaved to all these powers, these gods. What do? We start a new nation that follows the true God instead, so that we can get all nations back on track. And that makes a lot more sense of just like picking Israel as this, as yeah, we'll get there. Don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah.
But there we go. All right. If you like what we're doing here, then subscribe to our Patreon. It's $5 a month. And you can get some exclusive bonus content where we talk about random stuff, movies in depth, or just random topics that we're interested in that have less structure.
I think we'll have some more interesting ones hopefully soon.
Yeah.
About some of those more in-depth, sort of smaller topics.
Yeah. Yeah. We got some good
Side
questions recently that
tangents.
we're like, maybe we don't fill a whole episode, but we can fill a whole bonus thing with that.
Yeah.
We if you thought this was unstructured, oh boy, it's a lot less structured over there. But and we maybe have some guests over there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you liked what we're doing here and you don't want to pay us, that's okay. But please leave a review, because that is literally like the most efficient way for this to reach other people. And we want to do more things. We have ideas, but we need resources to do more things. So yeah, thank you. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have thoughts or questions from today's episode, please feel free to reach out and email us at info@kingdomcommentary.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or rating wherever you found this podcast and send it to a friend. That helps us a lot. Kingdom Commentary Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit supported by listeners like you. If you'd like to support what we're doing or become a patron, sign up for our Patreon and get exclusive access to bonus content, or go to kingdomcommentary.com/give to make a donation. finally, Kingdom Commentary is co-hosted by Matt Holliday and Josh Brinley and produced by Wilkins. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.